morning. 100 years ago today, these men, and 200,000 more British, French and German soldiers like them, were taking part in northern France in the opening stages of the largest and bloodiest battle in this country's history, the Battle of the Somme. This photograph is actually still from one of the first documentary feature films ever made. It shows men of the 1st Battalion, Chief Fusiliers, Berry's own regiment, in a place called the Sunken Lane of Beaumont-Hamel, just prior to going over the top to attack the enemy positions. Minutes after this image was recorded, most of these men had been killed or wounded by German machine gun and artillery fire. By the end of the 1st of July 1916, along an 18-mile front, over 19,000 British soldiers were dead, 4 of them former pupils of this school. Over the next 4.5 months of this grinding, terrible battle, around 120,000 British soldiers will die, 20 of them BGSB boys. The story of the Somme goes back 2 years. On August the 4th, 1914, following its invasion of neutral Belgium, Britain declared war on Germany. At this point, the British Army was tiny by comparison with the millions of trained men available to other European powers, like France, Germany and Russia, who forced young men to undergo a period of compulsory military service. As is the case today, Britain relied on a relatively small volunteer army for home defence and to police what was then a far-flung empire. Suddenly the country needed thousands more men to fight a large-scale, modern, industrial European war. The Liberal government at the time was reluctant to introduce conscription. Instead, the Secretary of State for War, Lord Kitchener, appealed for a new army of citizen volunteers to come forward to save the country, an appeal he made partly by this famous poster shown here, pointing. Wherever you sit or stand in relation to the poster, Kitchener is looking at you and pointing at you. His friend, the great Lancashire aristocrat, the Earl of Derby, suggested the creation of so-called pals battalions, where men from the same neighbourhood or line of work or club could join up and serve together. He felt this would encourage men who might otherwise be reluctant to join up. Starting in Liverpool, the idea that Lord Derby's home, the idea of pals battalions spread like wildfire, particularly through the industrial towns and cities of the North and Midlands. In Manchester, this appeal went out on the 31st of August 1914 to form a city battalion. The battalion is a unit of approximately 1,000 men, as you can see. You can see also the requirements for the men in this poster. Minimum height 5'3" chest 34.5, age limit 19 to 38. The authorities were totally taken by surprise by the response. And the recruiting office set up in Manchester was swamped by hordes of eager young men, eager to serve with their mates in what they thought would be a great adventure. Among the first in the queue on that first day of recruitment were best friends from Bury Grammar School, Hubert Dawson and Roger Smith, now both working in clerical jobs. They travelled down together from their homes in Walmsley and were proud to get into No. 1 Platoon A Company, 1st Manchester Powers. Within 24 hours, the 1st Battalion was filled up and the 2nd Battalion was being recruited. One of those who joined this unit on the 3rd of September was 20-year-old Herbert Howarth, a clerk at Parr's Bank in Bury, now the NatWest on the Rock. He almost certainly went in a group of his old friends from Bury Grammar School, because in this photograph of No. 16 Platoon, 2nd Pals, there are no fewer than 5 boys, old boys at Bury Grammar School. Herbert, his cousin John Howarth, fellow Parr's Bank employee Fred Harding, and brothers Frank and Eddie Nuttall. Pals indeed. Another former BGS pupil, Jack Bott, son of a primary school headmaster from Ramsbottom, was a bit slower off the mark. He got into the 4th Manchester Powers, where he served alongside a school friend from Greenmount, Tom Shaw. Eventually, no fewer than 8 battalions of Manchester Powers were formed, more than any other town or city. The next year, the Powers underwent training in drill, marksmanship, trench digging, and all the other delights of army life. At first, there were no uniforms, few weapons. They had to drill with broomsticks. and not many experienced instructors. They were all at the front. They originally counted scout tents in Eaton Park, where there will be a major event this evening to commemorate their presence there. But gradually their skills, fitness and level of equipment improved, and by March 1915 they marched proudly through the streets of Manchester past Lord Kitchener, the founder of the new army, when he visited Manchester. At the end of 1915 they were at last sent to France to join the growing number of British soldiers gathering there for the big push, which it would hoped would win the war. That attack would come on the chalk uplands north of a sleepy French river called the Somme. In the early summer of 1916, the British, in conjunction with a smaller French force on their right, prepared to assault the powerful German defences along an 18-mile L-shaped front, ending there with the French army to go. On the right of that line, adjoining the French, was the British 30th Division, whose task was to capture the important fortified village of Montauban. The 30th Division included the first 4 battalions of Manchester Powers. For weeks, the Powers carefully rehearsed their attack on a recreation of the German trenches behind the lines. They studied trench maps like this one, and you can see it very clearly. This shows the British positions near the village of Maricourt, where they dug in, and then lines of German defences, an important fortification called the Blacks Redoubt here, in front of the village of Montauban itself. The village of Montauban was 3,000 metres across enemy territory, on top of the slope. And beyond that, the important German trench called the Montauban Alley. That was their objective on the 1st of July. The plan was that on the 1st of July, the 4th Pals, including Jack Bott, would first capture the defensive position called the Blacks Redoubt in front of Montauban, before the 1st and 2nd Pals charged up the slope to capture the village itself and the trench Montauban Alley beyond. On the 24th of June, the British guns began the most intensive artillery bombardment in history up to that time. For a week, 3 million shells were poured into the German defences. It was expected that there would be little left to oppose the British infantry. Just before 0 hour, at 7:30 a.m. on the 1st of July 1916, 100 years ago today, the artillery bombardment reached a crescendo with 250,000 shells fired in the last hour. Then the British officers blew their whistles like this one, and along the 18-mile front, 100,000 British infantry left their trenches and moved across no man's land towards the German lines. At this point, some of you, perhaps many, will expect me to tell a familiar story of uncut barbed wire, German defences not destroyed, mowing down the slowly advancing British in droves with their machine guns. It was like that on much of the British front on that terrible July morning, but not at Montauban. Here, the 4th Manchester Pals advanced closely behind a creeping barrage, a line of artillery shells moving forward in front of them like a shield, obscuring their position with dust and smoke, and keeping the defenders' heads down until the last minute. This new tactic, which was used by almost no other units on the first day of the Somme, enabled the Pals to pass through the first 2 lines of German trenches with ease. And at 8:26, they entered and captured the Blacks Redoubt itself. That is the site of the Blacks Redoubt, taken 10 years ago, almost to the day, on our 90th anniversary of the school battlefields tour. It was a much hotter day. It was 36 degrees when we were standing there at the Blacks Redoubt. They secured the Blacks Redoubt quickly and began to put down a smoke screen to help conceal the main advance on Montauban. We know that's what the Blacks Redoubt looked like on the 1st of July. In those days, before personal radios, communication in the smoke and confusion of battle was difficult. News of the Pals' success and requests for further orders had to be sent by a runner until telephone lines could be installed in the newly captured redoubt. It was a perilous job requiring speed, stamina and daring. One of the runners, the personal runner of the commander of A Company, was Private Jack Bott. At some point in the day, he was killed carrying all these messages. His commanding officer wrote home to his parents, "You will no doubt have heard by now of the death of your son in action July the 1st. I should like to express my deepest sympathy with you and your loss. I cannot speak too highly of your son. He had been my runner for some time and didn't know what fear was. His courage and dash were wonderful. I never saw him hesitate, no matter how heavy the shelling was. He was killed in the execution of his duty, which must be some consolation to you. He did not suffer at all, but was killed instantaneously. I have written a report to my colonel of his bravery, and I sincerely hope his action will receive some reward. Sadly, he didn't receive any further reward. And the line about he did not suffer at all, but was killed instantaneously is a common line used in letters to relatives, however. With the capture of Black's Redoubt, 1st and 2nd Manchester's pals advanced side by side towards Montauban, including our three very grammar school boys here. By this time, the German defenders were fully alerted, and they suffered heavy losses from enemy shell fire and machine guns. Nevertheless, they moved forward across the labyrinth of German trenches, shown here in this artistry construction. They carried special ladders, as you can see, to help them cross enemy trenches quickly. In fact, they advanced so quickly that they got ahead of the timetable. The Powers had to wait for nearly 3/4 of an hour for the creaking barrage to finish shelling the village of Montauban itself. It was a terrible, nerve-wracking wait, but eventually the barrage lifted to the north of the village. The officers' whistles blew again, and with a mighty cheer, the 2 battalions of Manchester Powers swept up the slope towards Montauban. 2 battalions now mixed up in one solid mass. The demoralised defenders were quickly overcome, and 100 prisoners were taken. This is the photograph of the village after its capture. The Powers advanced north of the village and captured the important Montauban trench. From there they could look down into the valley beyond to Mamet Wood, High Wood and Delville Wood, features that would cost thousands of lives to capture in the months ahead. A small group of men from the 1st Powers, including very grammar school old boy Hubert Dawson, ran down the slope into the valley and captured 2 German field guns. Hubert Dawson had the cheek to chalk his name and his unit, Manchester Powers, on one. This little group, including a BGS old boy, had advanced further than any other British troops on 1st of July and captured the only German artillery secured on that day. An officer saw Hubert's best friend Roger Smith with his arm in a sling. The officer said, "You ought to go back and have that treated." Roger shook his head. "No, sir, if I go back I might end up getting sent to another unit. I'm proud to be a member of this one." After 1st of July, Roger Smith was promoted to sergeant. The 2 friends survived this battle. Within a year, both had been killed. Although Montauban had been captured, the battle was not over. 2nd Powers, including Herbert Howarth, dug in around the eastern side of the village, around the spot where the Powers Memorial now stands. Visited again on our 2006 tour. From early afternoon they came under heavy German artillery fire. Corporal Stewart heard a cry for help and found that the explosion of a German shell had buried several Powers alive. He left Herbert Howarth trying to dig them out while he went for a stretcher. When he returned, there was no sign of Herbert or the other men. At this point in time, it's not possible to reconstruct exactly what happened to him. One possibility is that he was wounded by another shell and evacuated by stretcher towards the main British lines. On the way back to safety, he succumbed to his wounds. After the war, his body was discovered by a battlefield clearance team, buried in the original German frontline trench around 1 mile south of Montauban. The position is marked on this map here. He was subsequently reburied in the beautiful Perron Road South British Cemetery, and as you can see, we visited his grave on the 19th anniversary of his death in 2006. 4 weeks later, his elder brother Ernest, a BGS old boy, was also killed serving with the Manchester Powers. John Bott has no known grave. He is one of 11 Bury Grammar School old boys commemorated on the Tietbart Memorial to the Missing, the largest British war memorial in the world. It will be the focus for the Somme commemoration events in France today. On our next visit in October, we will be taking one of the superb ceramic copies designed by Miss Gore and made by BGS pupils, containing the names of the 11 old boys commemorated. This is what it looks like before it is fired and glazed, and this is what it will look like when it is complete. We will take one of those with the 11 names out to Tietbart. One of the 11 commemorated on the memorial is 2nd Lieutenant Robert Hart, also died on the 1st of July 1916. He was a lecturer in chemistry at Manchester University in civilian life and died serving with the Royal Engineers, attempting to carry his second in command back to safety in the British lines. A few years ago, an identity tag and whistle belonging to him and supposedly discovered on the Somme battlefield is sold on eBay. The school considered buying it. We didn't in the end, but the purchaser who did buy it eventually donated it to the school. Now it's here. A poignant reminder of the sacrifice made by the young boys at the school. As the headmaster said, it's 7:30 this morning, sounding this whistle. It's exactly the same type. It's called an Acme Metropolitan, made by the Hudson Whistle Company in Aston in Birmingham, but still going strong. They made the Acme whistles for the Premier League. And I think it's fitting that it also serves as a focus of our commemoration today. It's become a sort of symbol of the first day of the song. In a moment, I'm going to ask you all to stand. The boys will then read out the names of 20 very grammar school boys who died in the Battle of the Somme. Please
Captain of Bury Grammar School 1950, died 12th of August 1916, aged 19.
Right, Wilbur Morris, Cameron Highlanders, Phil Darby, 16th of August 1916, aged 19.
Local Earl Singleton, Black Watch, died 8th September 1916, aged 21.
Private Tom Brockman, Quebec Regiment, Canadian Expeditionary Force, died 4th of September 1916, aged 19.
Sergeant John Leather, 5th of the Manchester Pals, died 25th of September 1916, aged 24.
Private James Willis, Grenadier Guards, died 26th of September 1916, aged 29.
Private Herman Ingham, Border Regiment, died 29th September 1916, aged 27.
Second Lieutenant James Shaw, Lancashire Fusiliers, died 12th of October 1916, aged 22.
Sergeant Roger Smith, Military Gunner, 1st Manchester Pals, brother of Alex Smith, died on the 15th of October 1916, aged 26.
Private William Rogers, Royal Fusiliers, died 13th November 1916, aged 24.
I'll read the headmaster will now go to a wreath on the war memorial. And I'll say the words of the exhortation by Lord to the silence. They shall grow not old as we that are left to grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor years content. After going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.